Hey everyone, I hope you're all in the midst of some very happy holidays, whatever they might look like this year. Welcome to our last Tax Talk Tuesday of 2020. This week, I wanted to hit on kind of a hodgepodge of things that were contained in this most recent COVID relief / government funding bill, mostly focused on the tax side, but wanted to start off with these stimulus checks. So, what's going on with those? Well, just in case you don't watch or read any form of news, President Trump signed this latest COVID relief bill, which was combined with a government funding bill on Sunday night of this week. This bill once again included these economic impact payments, which otherwise known as stimulus checks, but this time they're in the amount of $600 per person and $600 per dependent. So this means that payments to individuals were cut in half from what they were earlier this year, but the amount for dependents actually did go up by about $100. So this is what we know. Individual taxpayers making $75,000 or less and married taxpayers making $150,000 or less will receive the full economic impact payment. But what we don't know is whether the payment's going to increase as a result of President Trump and congressional Democrats, kind of weird to say those together, call for $2,000 payments per person. If it does, it's not likely that the $600 payment is going to change. So perhaps it's most likely that we're going to see a third round of payments of maybe $1,400 to come up to the $2,000. Or maybe even a full $2,000 per person, depending on how long this might take or if it happens at all. But because this is a tax video, I did want to reiterate that assuming all of these payments are treated the same way as the previous stimulus checks were, this payment is not an advance on your future tax refunds. Instead, this is treated as a tax credit that we simply don't have to wait for, so kind of like a rebate. This payment also is not going to affect the amount of money you get through federal benefits like Social Security, and receiving unemployment isn't going to disqualify you from receiving a stimulus check. So bottom line here, the stimulus payment is not taxed, but if you remember from one of our earlier videos, unemployment benefits are subject to income taxes, just a little reminder there. But enough about the stimulus checks. Back to one of our recent topics, the deductibility of expenses paid with PPP loan funds. So I don't think our most recent video, that was the extended tax talk, but the two previous videos before that were all dealing with PPP loans and whether or not you can deduct the expenses that you paid with those loans. Basically, the argument was Congress intended for those expenses to be deductible. And the IRS said no. Well, quite simply, Congress has put this issue to bed as part of the pandemic relief bill. The bill clarifies that you can deduct expenses paid with PPP loan funds, but the bill takes things a little bit further. It also explains that gross income this year is not going to include any forgiveness of certain loans, so the PPP loan funds are not going to be considered income if they are forgiven. Those emergency EIDL, economic injury disaster loan grants that some individuals got or some businesses got, that's not going to be considered gross income. And certain loan repayment assistance also not being considered income as it relates to the CARES Act passed earlier this year. So lots of things going on. PPP loan or expenses paid with PPP loan funds are deductible, and the CARES Act relief in the form of PPP loans, EIDL grants, that's not going to be considered income to any taxpayers. So this provision in the most recent pandemic relief bill also clarifies that deductions are allowed for otherwise deductible expenses paid with the amounts that are not included in this, or paid with the amounts from things like those EIDL grants or loan repayment assistance. So things that were not considered income, if you paid expenses, deductible expenses with those funds the same way that we would have with the PPP loan funds, that's also allowed. You are allowed to deduct those expenses. So in short, the IRS position and guidance that was announced in November is now incorrect. Previously, they said you cannot deduct expenses paid with PPP loan funds. That's wrong, and we should not follow that guidance. Finally, I think I read somewhere that the combined COVID and funding relief or funding bill is the longest piece of legislation ever presented. So it's not surprising that it's quite full of miscellaneous tax-related provisions as well. A few notable ones: Congress did include a temporary allowance for a full deduction of business meals instead of 50%, so long as the meal is provided by a restaurant. So business-related meals, a business expense, you can take that full amount as a deduction. The bill also increases the charitable deduction that's available to non-itemizing tax filers. So charitable deduction, non-itemizing filers, to $600 for married couples or $300 per individual. At least for this year, it had been just $300 regardless of if you're married or not. And lastly, the bill, the one that I saw that was kind of interesting, it permits individuals who have a net disaster loss, as modified by the bill, to increase their standard deduction amount by the amount of that net disaster loss. I think there's going to be a lot more to unpack here, so I'm probably going to do a follow-up video on this item in the new year, but I did think it was interesting that there's something included here that's going to increase the standard deduction. But speaking of the new year, we'll be keeping our eye on what happens in Georgia, because it very likely will have a tremendous impact on the tax world. If you don't know what I'm talking about, last week's video was our extended tax talk. Really encourage you to watch it, maybe in chunks. I think it's about 27 minutes long. But we're also working on a solutions video that focuses on how to deal with some of those potential changes if they come to light. And that's going to be posted really soon. Again, though, a lot of that's going to hang on what happens in the great state of Georgia. But as always, guys, we really do appreciate you taking the time to tune into these videos. If you have a topic that you'd like for us to explore, feel free to reach out. We're happy to do that. But until next time, I hope you have a great start to the new year. And here's to hoping that 2021 is a return to some kind of normalcy. Have a great Tuesday.